Evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. No. Good evening, everybody. Today I want to, touch on some of the announcements that were made at WWDC, and I want to kind of touch on what was announced, what I was surprised by and kind of disappointed by, and see let's tweet this out real quick. Okay. So first off, I want to say that keep in mind this is the Worldwide Developers Conference. It's mainly for software. It's not designed for hardware, but they did announce a MacBook Air and MacBook Pro. What surprised me was that they kept the old style of the MacBook Pro and brought in the new MacBook Air. And they, redid the body design on that. It has the newer keyboard. It has the newer camera. It has all this new stuff. And yeah, well, the MacBook Pro with the M2 basically just gets the new chip. And that kind of surprised me. So, no speaker upgrades, nothing like that. Now, the M1 was decent. Hi, Bradley. But this stuff kind of really surprised me to see, because some of the things that they utilize as far as software threw me off a little bit. Like, I have this fairly newly announced iPad mini, and it's very powerful. It's only a little bit behind the M1 chip when you look at performance as far as like rendering videos and a lot of the things that people would do on an iPad as far as like drawing and editing photos and things like that. It's maybe 10% behind. And so for them to leave out some of these features was surprising to me. Hi, Big John. Hope you're having a wonderful evening and you enjoy the discussion. So why they did that, though, for anybody wondering, and I thought about doing a separate video on this, but I felt like this topic really deserved a live stream, really deserved some interaction and some, content in there. And so I kind of wanted to talk about how Apple sees these devices and that they want to give you the best experience possible. And so part of the issue is, in order to bring Stage Manager and in order to bring some of these features, it has to support the smart access memory, basically where it can access the storage and use that in case you don't have enough memory in that place. And each application can use up to 16 gigs of memory. So they want to make sure that you're going to have decent sized storage. Now, this starts with 64 gigs, but so does the iPad Air, which was announced, and this was only $50 less than the iPad Air. Yet, because it doesn't have the M1 chip, there are some features that are left out. Essentially, this runs just like iPad OS 15. So if you have an iPad and you're like, oh, I really am rushing, I want to try this out, don't worry about it. The real only upgrades right now, I guess, are some of the messages stuff, like that they announced in iOS 16, the new weather app, and that is basically it. You don't get the lock screen customization that you get on the iPhone. You don't get even the ability to plug it into an external display and have it go full screen. Just doesn't happen. It's half-baked, and it feels, as Bradley says here, fragmented. And that was my first thought, was Apple is usually pretty good about not doing that. But we have to understand that this happened before, but this happened with their Macs. But because, Macs have never been in the forefront of things, I don't think people are would notice it as much when they went from the PowerPC Mac to the Intel based. And now from Intel to Apple Silicon, we are seeing some of that fragmentation with features happen. But a lot of those is like, well, yeah, it requires Apple Silicon because it requires the image signal processor for the camera as far as like center stage, and then it requires some of the hardware that's in there as far as like the AI for the voice and some of that stuff. But what I don't understand is you have a device right here that's literally as powerful as the last non M1 iPad, the A12Z chip. And so to see some of these features brought into play and you're left out because I decided I wanted something smaller. I could have got the iPad Air, spent $50 more, same amount of storage, you know, but I wanted this small device to be able to easily carry around. I had an 11-inch iPad Pro, and I found myself just grabbing my laptop when I wanted something that was that big, and if I wanted something even smaller, going to like my iPhone or one of my Android devices. And so I got this, and I mean, it's similar to the reason why, the Tab S8 here, if Samsung brought out their A line and made it as powerful, or brought out a smaller version of the S, like a S8 Tab S8 Mini, I would be super happy. So this leads me to believe that this year we will be seeing an M1 based iPad Mini, because I don't think they're gonna excuse me. I don't think they're gonna remove it from the line. Barry, good evening, sir. I don't see them getting rid of the iPad Mini. I know that it's huge amongst students and doctors and people that travel and pilots and things like that, and even people using it alongside with like the sidecar functionality to have a window on it for when you're doing a live stream is really handy. So I'm hoping that they'll bring a more powerful version of it, and I'm guessing that we're going to see them put the M1 in that, and the iPad Air we'll probably get the M2 just like the MacBook Air did, and they'll probably leave the older M1 iPad Air in there and drop the price on it. It looks to be that they're kind of following the methods that they do with iPhones and bringing that to the Macs and the iPads as far as when they release new hardware, kind of keeping the old one in play. And so that was a little, kind of threw me off, because Apple doesn't, it's kind of one of those, like, for example, with iOS 16, if your iPhone doesn't support, it just doesn't support it. There's not as many features that are left out apart from, well, if the camera doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. But all the rest of the stuff isn't really processor based. And so that kind of threw me off to see them do this with an iPad, where it's like, well, we're not even going to attempt to give you part of the feature. Even if you have half the memory, we're not even going to attempt to allow you to open 4 apps, 4 windows, and have them float instead of the full 8 when you have 8 cores, 8 gigs of memory. So the next thing I want to kind of touch on is Mac OS. And yeah, I'm running it, and yeah, it's neat, but I don't get this whole stage manager thing. It just, I get that it's supposed to prioritize focus for a singular use at a time, is how I see it. But then all your stuff is along the side, so you can quickly switch between applications, between programs, software, whatever. And I think what they're trying to do is get people to think about the desktop in a different way, and to think about multitasking in a different way, because you're really only ever going to be focused at one thing at a time. I doubt that people are, like, right now I have Twitter open and I'm live streaming, but I'm only looking at one thing at a time. To be able to have one eye on each thing is just really not going to happen. And so to have everything full centered, and I think also to prioritize the fact that more and more people are buying MacBooks, and they sold a decent number of 24-inch iMacs, so you're seeing people use the smaller screen devices, and so implementing this technology into that is awesome. Good evening, heck for your needs. Hey, Sharky. So that's where I see kind of that whole operation of that going. And then we know that a lot of times they adopt features from iOS, iPad OS into Mac OS and vice versa. So making those be a seamless kind of experience and operate together and appear together is something that's interesting to me and neat to see. But at the same time, I don't quite understand it, and I'm glad that it's a toggle, and at least in the betas, it's not on by default, and you can, still continue to use it in the normal mode. And I haven't figured out if you want to split screen from that, the easiest way to split screen from that. The I will say the most exciting feature is actually one that I'm using right now, and I'm using my iPhone as my camera. Unfortunately, my regular camera was acting up, and I think that there's something wrong with the lens, perhaps. It just wasn't focusing right. The frame rate was all messed up. It just wasn't a good experience. And so I'd rather use this. And yeah, pardon for we're in my living room and wider angle, and there's a shirt right there. There's a shirt back there, or stuff back there, but I don't only talk tech, I live it, so I let you into a little bit of my life. So that's what I'm doing with this. So the next thing I think that I wanted to touch on a little bit was seeing the direction where Apple is taking their hardware is really neat. And to see that potentially an iPhone with 8 gigs of memory wouldn't be far off. We already saw them bumping it up and going, to 4 gigs and going to like 6 gigs of memory. And I think the next phase is basically going to be a version of the M1 chip in an iPhone, and that you'll be able to connect that up and get that secondary output. And maybe when they do that, then they'll say, you know what, we're bringing this to the A-line chip and we're going to put it on the older iPad. I think because they've done that in the past with some of like the live photos and some other things. And so hopefully to see some of this stuff kind of brought and utilized, because it would be a shame for people that just bought a device to literally have it basically get nothing on the updates apart from like a few new apps, email change, Safari updated, new weather app, and that's pretty much it. Hi Tech Loving Mama, how are you? And so, one of the things, y'all let me know if you can hear this. Let's see here. I'm gonna see if you can. So, to me, I feel like some of these features are Apple's way of letting us know the path that they're headed. And if you think about it, on the Android side, there's desktop mode that's built into Android, and you have DeX mode that's built into the Samsung devices, and you have all this stuff, and people kind of, Apple is known for waiting because, as a lot of people will say, they wait to kind of perfect it. I think it's more of the idea of they have to make sure that the experience works well as best they can across all their products and across their whole line for the ecosystem, and that things just kind of just work. Like, to do this, all I had to do was literally grant permission on my phone, and when I went into FaceTime, I went to the drop down and the phone shows up. And when I go into apps like Melon app that I use for streaming here, it just shows up as the camera and as the option to be used for this. And so it's neat to see it just works. Now, not everything is flawless. For example, I'm getting about a 20% hit on battery life on my iPhone 13 Pro. Now, keep in mind it is a beta. And I think that what was interesting to me to see is that they're bringing some of the pro aspects, hardware-wise, down to the MacBook Air and even like the iPad Air, to see some of the stuff, like bring the design and the port faster port and bringing like the Apple Pencil support, that they're trickling this stuff down. And it makes sense because the fewer options that they have to do, it's cheaper for them to design because they can essentially just say, like they used to do with the iPad Air, used to be basically 2 generations behind physical hardware as far as display and the casing with this product for um this generation's processor. A lot of times what they would do is like the iPad Air would be, for example, a 2022 iPad Air would have the 2021 processor and the 2020 body. And that used to be the way that they kind of did things. But it's interesting to see them upgrading stuff. And part of that, I think, is the repair stuff. And because then they can utilize the whole ability for you to kind of repair some of these devices yourself. If the hardware isn't all over the place, it's easier for them to produce product, and it's a good method, and it's interesting to see them headed in a different direction. I think the next exciting thing I kind of wanted to bring up is that, or at least exciting for me, is the whole option to, before I get into this, let's touch on some comments here. Yeah, only for M1 products, really, a lot of these features. Bradley says, I want to pick up an M1 iPad Air down the road. I thought that was a weird product, but now that I'm seeing like an iPad Air, I'm seeing, yeah, it's a 64 gig option, but you can connect up external drives, something like this. And now that they have the option to connect it up to an external display, and you get a lot of the features that you get out of the Pro device, if you're somebody that's going to connect up and use an iPad and you don't need the high refresh rate, you're okay with the way the Apple Pencil works on it, you want to save money, I mean, it's now $200 cheaper for a base iPad Air than it is for the 11-inch iPad Pro, and it's literally zero point 0.1 inches smaller. So I think that would be a good thing to go with, and you can see if you like the new features or not, test it out. And so that's another thing that Tech for Your Needs brings up. Carriers do installments on iPad, just need to do the down payment. That's true. And Samsung is really the only other company that you can buy tablets from that do that, but it's not even all their tablets that offer that. It's the S8 Plus, the regular Tab S8, and the Tab S8 Ultra. As far as I know right now, they don't even have carrier options. And so, Apple does with the Mini, the Air, the older iPad Pro, the newer iPad Pros. And so, but what I was going to touch on is the security features. And one thing is biometric authentication, which I know other companies have touched on, Pixel with their Titan chip and things like that, and Samsung with their integration. But the fact that Apple has said, hey, we're going to work with Microsoft and Google to create a unified standard so that you can use an iPhone as a way of authenticating biometrically, Touch ID, Face ID, even if it's not on a Mac, is kind of cool. So what that leads me to believe is that it works with the website, and your device, when you go to the website, your device just stores that locally, and then it communicates to the website and says, yep, you are who you say you are, unlock. And there's no passwords, nothing. It just knows who you are. And so by creating a standard, it's exciting. The other kind of privacy standard that's exciting to me was the stuff having to do with kind of the stalking prevention stuff, where somebody breaks up their significant other, and they can go in and with one click see what they're sharing with people and disable all the stuff that they're sharing with that person. So iCloud storage, they're no longer able to see pictures of you, maybe your kids, no longer have access to your location if you were sharing that with them via family sharing. There's all sorts of methods for this. I see this significantly important, and some people are like, where does this matter? And I want to talk about this because I feel like this is really important to touch on, that there are programs out there where if you have an older iPhone, so let's say you have an iPhone 6 or 7 and it's no longer going to be supported with iOS 16 and you decide, you know what, I'm just going to, there are programs where you can donate it. And so you donate an old iPhone, and battered women's shelters, homeless shelters and stuff will give them to people there. And so I can see where somebody has an iPhone, or they already had one and they get involved in with something and they want to get out of that relationship, and there's huge control over, like, well, I can just find you, or I have access to all your account stuff, I'm going to go in and change it. You can, now with this, the idea of with one click of a button to be able to kind of say, nope, I'm taking my life back and I'm continuing, is huge, both metaphorically and literally. Taking their life back is significant. I've been in mentally abusive relationships in the past, and this would have been great to have, to just be like, you know what, I'm done, because I was with somebody that I continued to go back to time and time again. And if I could have just with one click clicked, and it would have kind of gotten rid of that, and it would have erased, and even gone in and erased their phone number and kind of made it more difficult for them to reach out to me, I don't think I would have gone back. Now, I don't regret those things because I wouldn't have met my wife if it wasn't for some circumstances of things after that. And so, to me, these significant features are personal for me, for experiences that I've had cousins, sisters, relatives, friends, people that I know and interact with every day experience some of these things. And so it's great to see them kind of be at the forefront of saying, yeah, it's not like they are saying this didn't exist, but kind of putting their feet forward and saying, we want a method that all these companies agree on. And same thing with Matter, which, if you don't know what that is, I'm not going to go too nerdy in it, but it's basically the idea of, right now there are so many protocols for smart home connection, and you have all these things in there that, like, Apple has HomeKit, Samsung has their own, Google has their own. Samsung and Google have been working a little bit closer lately. Amazon has their own. But Matter is a standards that was developed, and it was actually a group of people that were former Apple employees, if I remember correctly, that had worked on one of the Mac teams in the past. Bunch of employees that had worked at Apple, some that had worked at Google, I think some Amazon employees, Microsoft employees, just groups of developers and people that work together to kind of create this method, create this standard, so that basically these companies can just implement a method and your stuff just works on it. So the idea is, if it fits that standard, it will work within HomeKit. So these companies no longer have to necessarily go to Apple and be like, well, does this fit the MFI, the Made for iPhone program? Does this fit this protocol? Does this fit this? Matter is a unified standard for that. And so it doesn't matter if Amazon makes it, if Google makes it, if Apple makes it, if Microsoft makes it, if Sony, Samsung, LG, any of these companies make it. If they want to basically give their product access to millions, if not billions of users, because there's a ton of Apple users, tons of people with iPhones, tons of people that are integrating this stuff, especially when they're working from home, and especially when they're setting up lights, and you can go buy lights for cheap at Walmart and put them into a lamp to be able to set up and dim and control around your space. And people were at home more and more, and there's people more and more investing into smart home technology. It's getting cheaper. thermostats, lights, fans, plugs, all the switches, all this stuff is getting cheaper. It's getting easier for you to install by yourself. And so Matter is just, it just all works together. So it's no longer like Apple saying, well, you have to be in our ecosystem. It's more like everybody is in our ecosystem now. It's their way of saying, we want to recognize that there's these standards, and we want you to recognize that there's these standards, and we were going to talk about it. And I think that one of the greatest things is that there are a lot of people that watch this conference that aren't just developers, that are watching it to see what they're going to announce, watching it for the software stuff. And so to see that they now are privy to this, where maybe the other conferences that happen, they kind of don't watch because they can be a little bit too techy, a little bit too technical, boring sometimes, people on there that nobody knows who they are, they go on and on. Apple kind of tries to make things fun. They go a little bit overboard sometimes. But I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I'm going to sound like an Apple fanboy with this, but you've seen me and you've heard me complain in here too, you know. For example, Tech for Your Needs says right now I'm not a happy camper with my iPad. You know, if it's kind of your only Apple product, that's like for him using it on the go as a cellular iPad and making money with it, and you know, you spend the money that you do to get a cellular model, and then to have to basically upgrade to the next model just to get some of the features that we know can be done. They allow third-party companies to output video source to things. There's other apps that have done something similar where they kind of have one view on the iPad, and then there's a secondary on the second screen that's full screen, and there's windows that float around. We know that it can be done that way. And it's going to be even less resource hungry if Apple implements it. So they can build it into there. I just think that they don't want a different experience for that. Because the basic experiences, and this is, I guess you could consider a basic experience, tends to be balanced across all devices. Really, if you think about it, your FaceTime experience, your iMessage, a lot of these things, being able to take a FaceTime call on your phone and switch it over to your iPad or your Mac, or vice versa, and deleting messages, unsending messages in iMessage and in Mail, and the stuff that I've spoken about, a lot of the basic stuff works no matter which iPhone or iPad you have. You know, camera specific features require specific camera hardware. And it's just weird to see them kind of pick and choose and be like, but I guess the idea was they wanted to bring it out, and they wanted to have it work well, and they, similar to how Samsung, you know, on this device right here, the Flip 3, I don't get Samsung DeX, even though this has the same internals and has a decent amount of memory as other devices, and you know, being able to plug it in. So, you know, that's some of the things in there that are interesting. And we think about like some of the older iPads, unless you bought the higher end, for a while it was, you know, 4 gigs on the lower end and 6 gigs on the upper end, and then they moved it to 6 gigs on the lower end and, you know, 8 gigs or 6 gigs across the board, I believe, with the 2020 model, and then 2021 is 8 gigs, and you know, if you have the 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte, you got 16 gigs of memory on the upper end there. And so one of the things, though, that I found is it's not just about the memory. It's the type of memory, it's the speed of it, and it's also about the storage, because they are using, like I said, they're using swap memory, so they're allowing you to use storage basically because the storage is fast, and most iPads have a decent amount of it now, to be able to use that to store stuff in place of memory, because it's gotten so fast that that's what they're doing. So for this feature, and it's not just something where, you know, it's just running on the external display or just running on the iPad. It's running on both. So if you think about it, like when I hook up my S22 Ultra, or I hook up my Tab S8 to an external display and I initiate DeX, it's running externally. the phone interface or the tablet interface is running natively, but that desktop interface, the floating windows, the things that uses more resources are happening externally. Where the way Apple's doing it, they are making it so that basically that experience, the multitasking, the floating windows, the views, the split view, all that stuff is happening on both. So it's being pushed to the display of the iPad itself, but also to whatever monitor you're using. And they're showing this working with a 6K display. And so that's the other thing to think about that's interesting is like, I think part of it too is because the M1 iPads use a Thunderbolt port, not just a regular USB-C port, but the Thunderbolt protocol. And so data transfer on there is going to be faster. I've used this along with an app called Shadow PC, where basically it works like a virtual machine, and I had one display on here and then it actually works with a secondary display on my monitor, and it worked okay. But if you consider that was 1440p on the second display and whatever resolution on this, and now both at 60 hertz versus whatever that's running up to 120 hertz on the iPad Pro plus a 6K display at 60 hertz, that's a lot of pixels to push per second. And some of them are happening twice as often on the iPad, and I'm sure when it goes into that mode that there's things that are taken into consideration so that the experience is smooth. They didn't really mention, does it continue to operate with the 120 hertz ProMotion display on the iPad and then, 60 hertz externally, or do they both run at 60 hertz so that it seems, it doesn't experience any lag and it doesn't push too much on it, because talking about something pretty small, pretty thin, and I kind of understand that they don't want the heat in there, but just giving an option where you can use fewer apps, or if you're using like a video editing app and a photo editing app side by side, you can have one open on the external display and one open on the regular, or both open on the external display but nothing on the regular on some of these smaller devices. Because we see other companies do the same thing. They limit it to certain hardware. They limit it to, to a certain number of apps. So, Tech for Your Needs, he uses Shift Screen, which is the one I was talking about. It's pretty neat. I don't like the way that when you go to play video, sometimes it acts up and doesn't want to play on an external display, and I'm trying to figure out that whole thing, especially when you have two windows open. And the other thing that I was excited to see, and they slipped it into when they were talking about games, was background download and background upload, so that your characters and your maps and different things can download in the background, and you can go on and do other things. So I'm sure that that's something that other app developers will be able to use for the API, and hopefully we'll see like Google Photos put that out and other apps so that you can have your photos uploading in the background and no problem. Because like with my iPhone and my iPad, with a native Photos app, when I'm taking photos, I don't have to open the app and wait for them to sync up. They just sync up when it's connected or whenever, you can go through and manually do it. These are some things that, I find interesting. And Sharkfin says, I love Dex. Some people crap on it, but I believe it's arguably better methodology than what Apple's trying to do. I will say in some ways it is. I like the fact that it's a native thing, and now Apple's kind of doing this native thing, and the way that it is right now is not really the final way. So in these betas, and then there's some things about the fact that I like that the UI is, when you're using Dex on an external display, and then you can choose the option to continue to use your mouse and stuff on the tab itself or the phone, that you're dealing with two different UIs. You're dealing with notifications in different spots. You're dealing with when you go to click to open an app, it has to like close out to move to the other. Where the way that Apple's done it is interesting, because if you have Safari open on the iPad and then you go to open it on the other, it just pushes over there because it treats it all kind of as one experience, two different windows, but within one experience. And so that's cool to see. And I would like to see Samsung say, you know what, we can run DeX on the tablet and the external display. I mean, these tablets have 8 gigs, 12 gigs of memory. You know, we're seeing ones with 16 gigs of memory on these devices. And, you know, phones with, I understand why not on a phone, but at least on the tablet, since it runs native. Septian. Yeah, I know you subbed before. I've been having experiences with that where people, for some reason, they'll pop in and be like, I thought I was subscribed. Why did I not get? And then they check Twitter and they get alerted. That's why I posted to Twitter. I need to use the community tab more, but of course, if you don't have notifications on or you're not subscribed, that doesn't help. So also people watching, if you don't follow me on Twitter, check that out. What else? Oh, custom profiles for spatial audio. So I used my iPhone and it took a picture, or it took kind of a 3D scope diagram, you know, mapping with the front cameras of my right ear, and then it did my left ear, and it does front to back, and it goes around there, and then it basically creates a custom method so that when I put these on and I'm listening, it's tuned specifically to my ears. And that's something, you know, that for, you know, $550 pair of headphones, it's not how much I paid for these. I got them from a buddy of mine. But, you know, for that, to add these features, to add stuff like that, is stuff that, you know, sometimes people pay good money to have these things done with IEMs, and you go to the doctor and you do, and, you know, it would probably be better to have that done. And what's cool is you can still do that. Like, there's something that Apple doesn't really talk about a lot, and I didn't see them really mention in this, that's kind of neat too, is you can have an audiogram done. So you can either go into some of these apps where they play these tones and you wear the headphones and then you adjust them and it creates kind of a custom audiograph, and then you can bring that in and actually bring it in through accessibility and set it so that your headphones will use that, so it maps based on your hearing. But also, if you go to an ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor, and you have your hearing checked, or you know you have a hearing problem and you wear hearing aids and you can get that information, being able to import that in is incredible to me. And it's exciting to see all this stuff. And I feel like people who kind of poo-poo and crap on Apple don't really understand how much they not necessarily come up with these things, but like there is innovation in there. And innovation doesn't necessarily require absolute new stuff. I mean, once the first smartphone was made in a brick style, then nothing after that, I guess, is innovation. Once the first smartphone that had a camera in it came out, once the first smartphone that could go on, you know, once the first phone that could go online before a smartphone, then after that is technically not innovation then. A folding phone, LG had their, you know, it had a keyboard and a screen on it, but that was, you know, the Surface Duo type thing or the dual screen thing. There's been folding screen technology that has existed for a multitude of years. But if we consider all of this, then nobody has innovated since like the 1940s, 1950s. You know, internet has existed for many, many years. There were forms of internet and computers that existed back in the 1800s, even with, you know, manual technology. So what's exciting though is software-based stuff is awesome. OnePlus with Audio ID, Soundcore with Hear ID. Yes, they all have these, you know, ways that you can tune and you can listen to these things that kind of like you go to the ear doctor and it's like the tone, it's like boom, boom, you know, can you hear this? Boom, can you hear this? Bing, you know, and it goes at different frequencies to test your hearing range from high to low, and you can tune it in. But the thing is, because Apple knows the output of their AirPods Max, when you do it specifically for that, they're able to say, well, put it all within this range, and we know these headphones can handle certain frequencies, so it works. Where if it just worked and you just plug in any set of headphones, when you go in, unless the software knows the frequency response to those IEMs, to those TWS, to those over the ear, on the ear, open back, close back headphones, whatever technology you're using, it's not really going to be able to tune to it. And so, while Apple kind of steps their toe in everything, the advantage you get is that they can come up with software and make it happen and tune it to it because they don't have to wait on other companies. Samsung, when they do decks on PC, they had to basically work with Microsoft and work and say, well, we want to make sure that the basic standard for the version of Windows that it works with suits these minimum needs. But there's no guarantee. Microsoft can say, sure, we'll make sure other companies do it, but they don't. You still have the HP Stream with like 4 gigs of memory and Celeron, crappy processors. You still have this stuff that's coming out there that's not going to be able to have the best experience. And it's incredible, isn't it, Septian? He says, Apple is going the spatial audio route. Just tested out personalized spatial audio on iOS 16 briefly. Yes, I am geeked too. This is exciting to me. And why it shouldn't be exciting to other people, I don't care if you use or like Apple products or not. But think about what happens when a company creates something and how it benefits you and how it's going to benefit you in the end as a user for people that are using smart home stuff, for people that forget passwords all the time but always have their phone on them, creating a standard that's required to be in there. Think about how Thunderbolt wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for Apple sitting down with Qualcomm and and Intel and some of these other companies to create this standard. Think about it. USB-C wouldn't even be a thing if it weren't for some of these things coming into play. Display technology, there's stuff inside an iPhone that maps specific areas of the display for touch response so that game developers can basically say, well, we need the touch response to be fast in these zones. And they can do that, but they can have the rest of the display be like, well, the game can only play back at 60 frames per second, and we want to do that so it doesn't matter what iPhone you're using. But we understand that iPhones have really fast touch response, so they integrate that. This is stuff that nobody talks about, that nobody really looks into. I mean, you have the Rene Richies and some of these people that dig into it, but this stuff geeks me. And other companies are doing this too. And, the on-device learning as far as voice dictation is exciting. And the auto-punctuation, and, Google did this with the Pixel. And, they bounce and they share from each other. Apple was one of the first companies to basically say that developers had to put into their app that when you have dark mode on, that basically all apps will go into dark mode. Or you can specify whether it's a manual thing or, you have the choice. But it's kind of one of those requirements. And then Android said, we're going to integrate dark mode at a system level. OnePlus was one of the first to actually do it the way that, then Apple came out and did it. But there are things that are created as a standard, whether you like it or not, when a company that's as big and has as much money and as push and is willing to put their name out there and they get sued constantly. And then there's the thing today where there was the discussion on the split payment method announced for Apple Pay later, and that they are taking responsibility for that. They work with, right here, I'll show you. I have an Apple card, right? And they work with Goldman Sachs. And, I can show you this because there's no information other than my name, right? No information on there. No privacy on there. You can't do anything with that. But they said, you know what? Goldman Sachs is taking forever and they're not going to do what we want to do. And we want to be able to offer people an option to buy stuff. And yeah, there's a method behind the madness of that. Great, I can't afford an iPad and I want it. Well, now I can do it in split payments and I can pay, let's say $250 down today, $250 in 2 weeks, $250 in 4 weeks, and the remaining $250 in 6 weeks, I paid my $1,000 off. and they're doing it at 0%, and they're taking huge risk, and they're taking potential for lawsuits, and they're taking on, like, if people don't pay it and they go to collect it, that, they're going to have to handle it themselves because they're not working through a bank to do it. They're becoming their own method. And there's financial issues with that. I'm sure there's SEC and all this stuff that they had to consider, and they had to consult attorneys and all this stuff. But what's exciting to me is that all these companies create competition, and yeah, fair or not under the Cook regime, Apple's changes often seem evolutionary and not revolutionary. The perception is that they're late to the game due to focus on perfection. Kind of. It says, I believe Steve Jobs would have pushed out a foldable iPhone by now. I don't. At all. Nope. It doesn't serve any purpose. It can't do anything different than a regular phone and a tablet can do, which they already have. There's no middle ground for it. The UI stuff for it, we've seen companies like, I've used it. I've enjoyed it for what it is, but it's expensive and doesn't have the best hardware in there. And it really won't ever be able to. I won't say it never will, but even when we see these third party, seeing imports doing it, when they add this stuff, it's like, well, yeah, now this device is super heavy, thick in your pocket, and you need super fast charging because it's still going to drain rather quick. So having 66 watt, 80 watt, 100 watt, whatever charging in there is necessary. The problem is physics. Apple was going thinner and thinner to a certain point, but Steve Jobs he wouldn't have fallen for that. He wanted, today, what we see on an iPad existed on the Newton back in the 1970s and 1970s concept, 1980s made into play with the whole option of and stuff that existed before, Palm Pilots and existed before Blackberries existed way back then, the idea of, and yeah, he borrowed ideas from, from other companies, but like being able to use a pencil and write in handwriting and have that convert out, the method that these companies use to do that, where it's in a box and it converts it, that existed back in the 1970s. Nothing is, like I said, a lot of this is just iterative. Evolution, not revolution. It's no company really, like, apart, like, we're seeing cool stuff in hardware, and we're seeing smaller and smaller, we're seeing them get to 5 nanometer, 3 nanometer. We're seeing where they can place more resistors and more technology into smaller stuff, but all this is doing is making it so that stuff that's always existed just gets more efficient, really. Because by doing that, then eventually when you reach a peak on that, then you can start saying to these companies, we can invest in battery technology. Because right now, Apple has to kind of work on all this at once. That's the downside of what they're doing. If you think about it, that's the downside of this method is, yeah, they work with TSMC and they tried working with BOE until BOE lied about the testing and tried to fib and stuff. And, they work with LG and they work with Samsung and they work with Japan Display and they work with all these companies. But when they invest in the R&D and they start manufacturing their own chip, and then, they bought rights and they're going to be manufacturing their own, networking stuff as far as cellular and Wi-Fi coming up here soon, we know. And they want to manufacture their own displays, and the eventual reality of it will be that Apple will basically manufacture it all, and they want to get away from actually relying on third-party companies, so when they want to change something, they can do it right away. And they don't have to tell the other companies. They don't have to worry about leaks. They don't have to worry about waiting for a company and the company being like, well, we can't do it that way, and then maybe it has to affect something else. But in reality, when I pick up and I have a Snapdragon processor and it has Qualcomm in there. And even Samsung is using, LG. They use some LG cameras and they use some LG displays and they use some other companies' technologies in their stuff. And you have Intel chips and you have ARM-based chips and you have all this stuff that's in there that when the change needs to be done, it just can't be as efficient, it can't be as quick, and it can't be as secure, and it can't be as, the quality can't necessarily be as optimal. And it's just truth. You cannot change the reality of that. It's just like if I'm manufacturing potato chips, if I grow the potatoes, if I culminate the field, if I know the process for planting those, if I know what's in the dirt, in the soil, if I know what I am doing as far as fertilization, if I also know the treatment of the water, if I can affect every level from input to output, I can create the best potato chips in the world. But if I don't have that experience, I can only control so much. And yeah, well, it's not a good thing. At the same time, in the end, it can benefit the user because there's also a limitation or reduction in overhead. It's simple business when we talk about it. In reality, the whole idea is I'm the only one responsible for what I'm doing right now. I'm responsible for the quality of this. If I had a team of people working and somebody is working on setting up my audio and my video for me and they can't get it done, and then I go to sit down and I go, what's going on with this? And they say to me, well, this is what we had to do, I could be mad. But if I hired in somebody that I know that's going to come to me and say, hey, Michael, we're going to have you use your iPhone for your live stream because your camera's having issues, and they do that far enough ahead of time, I can say, have you tried this? Yep, okay. This is what we deal with. The thing is, whenever a person or a company or a method, hands over stuff, that's a huge phase because ask Eric, Easy Computer Solutions. I guarantee, he owns and operates a cake business. He operates his own YouTube channel. He does all this stuff. He is a very hardworking man because the benefit of the control is that he can just sit down, record, edit, upload whenever he wants. He's not relying on, I edited it or I recorded it, now I got to send it to my editor. Hopefully my editor's awake at 3 o'clock in the morning when I got it done. I want this video up by 5 a.m., ready and done by 5 a.m. so I can look at it because I need it up by 8 a.m. And I know how long my internet's going to take to upload. There is not that if you're working with other people. Now the benefit is you can create side projects and you can do things that you don't have experience with and knowledge with. You can create a business, you can culminate relationships with other people so that they'll create the videos, they'll create the experience, they'll create the content that you just can't do because you don't have the knowledge or the time to learn it. And so when you think about it, when one company, a company like Google, Microsoft, Apple, Samsung, any of these companies do something and they go into a new space, that requires that they fully trust that the technology and what they're already in is well developed enough and that the people that work for them will be able to continue that as they expand and they hire in new people and they take risk. And it's a huge risk. I take a risk every time I go to do one of these videos, every time I sit down to do a live stream, every time I talk to somebody, I take a risk. Every time I make a video, I take a risk of somebody coming on and calling me a liar, of somebody, having a different experience and not understanding this is my experience, of sitting down in front of the camera and messing up, of saying the wrong thing, of, mistakenly, not lying, but like telling something that I thought was correct that isn't. So I got to do research. But quite often I love the freestyle speaking. You see me, I don't have a script. Anything I came over was all ideas from kind of a splattering of what happened at this event, a smattering of what happened at these events. See, I just messed up. A smattering, a smithering, and whatever, a culmination of what happened at this event. And I'm coming down and I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you guys. And the great thing is I have control over it, so I know when to start, and I'm sorry that I was late, and I know when to end it. And that is when Easy Computer Solutions starts at 9 o'clock right now. Head on over, watch it, join me in the chat. I'll see y'all later. Thanks, Sharkfin. Thanks, Septian. Thanks Tech for Your Knees. Thank Bradley, Tech Love and Mama, Barry, Big John, everybody who came through the live stream. If you're here for the replay, hit hashtag replay crew in the comments afterwards. If you're here for live, please go down below after and just take a minute, few seconds to do hashtag live crew or hashtag I was here live or live here too. One, whatever. Just let me know how you were here. If you're new, please let me know. If you subscribed today and this is your first time to a live stream, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll hit that subscribe button so you get notified the next time I'm live and the next time I drop a video. And I hope that you all enjoyed my enthusiasm and you learned something new and it kind of made you think a little bit different. Yeah, think different, clever, didn't mean to do it. One more thing. Yes, I did mean to do that. See you all next week. Thanks for watching. Peace and love.